The empty seat at La Rampa. If you ever walk down La Rampa, the famous slope in Havana that spills into the Malecon, you'll find dozens of cafes tucked between Art Deco buildings and faded cinemas. Most are half empty now, with paint peeling off their walls and ceiling fans barely moving the humid air. But there's one small cafe right on the corner of 23rd Street that still keeps its regulars. That's where I first saw her, an old woman, always sitting at the same table near the window. Same spot, same time, every afternoon. She wore a pressed white dress, always clean, always ironed, with a small brooch that looked like a flower. She didn't talk to anyone, not even to the staff. She'd just sit there, slowly stirring her coffee, even after the sugar had long dissolved. Everyone in the cafe knew her, but nobody really knew her. They called her La Señora del Asiento Vacío, the lady of the empty seat. When I first started going there, I thought the second coffee she ordered was for someone who hadn't arrived yet. The waiter would bring 2 cups every time, one in front of her, one across the table. But the seat across from her stayed empty. Always. Sometimes she'd glance at it like she was expecting someone to sit down. Sometimes she'd even smile at nothing, murmuring softly under her breath, as if answering a question only she could hear. When I asked the older waiter about it, he just shook his head. "Don't ask," he said. "It's for her husband. He disappeared back in the old days. During, He didn't say more, but I knew what he meant. During the revolution. A lot of people disappeared then. Some ran. Some were taken. Some never came back. After that, I started noticing small details. Every time she left, she'd fold a few pesos under her saucer, enough for 2 coffees. She'd fix the chair across from her before walking away, aligning it perfectly with the table. And if someone sat there before she arrived, the staff would quietly ask them to move. No one ever argued. It wasn't a written rule, but everyone respected it. One rainy afternoon, a new waitress started working there. Young girl, probably from outside Havana. She didn't know the story, didn't know the rules. When the old lady came in and ordered 2 cafes, the waitress smiled and asked, "Su esposo viene más tarde? Your husband's coming later?" It was just a polite question, but the woman froze. Her hand trembled, the spoon slipped from her fingers, and clattered onto the floor. The whole cafe went silent. Then she stood up, her face pale as the sugar bowl, and whispered, "No, he's already here." And just like that, she left. The next morning when the cafe opened, her seat was still empty. The waiters thought maybe she'd come later, but she didn't. When they went to clean the table, they found 2 cups, both cold, both half finished. The waitress swore she hadn't served them. The coffee machine hadn't even been turned on yet. No one saw her again after that. Weeks passed. Life in Havana moves slow, but it always moves on. Tourists came and went. Musicians still played outside for tips. And the smell of tobacco and sea salt mixed in the air like always. But every now and then, someone would notice something strange in the cafe. A faint outline of 2 cups on the table, even after wiping it down. The chair across from the window slightly pulled out. Once, an older man who claimed to be a photographer swore he saw a faint reflection of a man sitting across from her in an old picture he took years ago. Gray suit, dark glasses, a shadow where his face should have been. Nobody believed him, but no one laughed either. Eventually, the owner replaced all the tables and chairs during a renovation. All except that one. He said it didn't feel right to move it. Now, if you walk in and sit by the window, the air feels colder there, even on hot afternoons. Sometimes the sugar in your coffee clumps up like it's been sitting too long. Sometimes the waiter will quietly bring a second cup and place it across from you, just in case. And if you ask why, they'll smile politely and tell you not to worry. But if you stay long enough, if you wait until the city quiets and the evening light turns that warm Havana gold, you might catch a reflection in the glass. An old woman in white, sitting across from a man in a gray suit, both silently sharing their coffee as if time had finally given them one more afternoon together. So, if you ever go to La Rampa and you see that empty seat by the window, leave it empty. They're still having coffee. Sugarcane. If you've ever driven past a sugarcane field at night, you'll know that smell. Sweet, smoky, almost metallic. It sticks to your clothes, your hair, everything. In Cuba, when the harvest season comes, the fields burn before dawn. The fire clears the dry leaves, so the cane can be cut cleanly. The whole sky glows orange, and from a distance, it looks like the earth itself is on fire. That's where this story begins. In one of those fields, somewhere between Matanzas and Cienfuegos, long before cell phones and imported cars, when men worked from sunrise to dusk and still couldn't afford shoes. His name was Luisito. He was young, strong, and poor, like most who worked the cane. His hands were tough from swinging the machete, and his shoulders darkened by years of sun. He didn't talk much, but when he did, he smiled with his whole face. The kind of smile that made people forget how hard life was. And maybe that's what caught Isabella's eye. She was the daughter of Don Salvatierra, the factory supervisor, the boss of the mill, the man whose word was law from the fields to the loading docks. Isabella wasn't supposed to be near the workers, but she'd sneak out sometimes, carrying water for the cutters or bringing her father's lunch. She said she liked the smell of the fields better than the stench of the mill. Luisito and Isabella met like that, in the heat under the hum of cicadas when the cane leaves shimmered silver in the sun. At first, they just talked about the sky, the harvest, the ocean she'd never seen. But one day, he handed her a piece of raw cane he'd just cut. "Here," he said, "sweetest one I've found today." She smiled, bit into it, and said, "Then we'll share it." That was how it started. People talk, of course. In small towns, they always do. One of the foremen saw them walking together near the irrigation ditch and told Don Salvatierra. The man went red with rage. "You think you can touch my daughter with those hands?" he shouted. "You belong in the fields, not near my house." Luisito didn't argue. He stood there, head low, dirt still on his boots. The next morning they sent him away to another work site miles inland, past the river, where the soil was dry and the pay was worse. A punishment. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. Isabella stopped coming to the fields. Years passed. Luisito stayed in that other camp. He worked, he saved, he drank cheap rum to forget. Every night he dreamed of her laugh, her hair tied back with a red ribbon, the sound of her voice, calling his name through the cane. When the revolution came and the mill changed hands, he finally returned. The old bosses were gone or dead. The signs on the gate had been repainted, but the land was the same, endless green stretching toward the horizon. He asked around, "Where's Isabella Salvatierra?" The answer came from an old mill worker who'd lost an arm in the press. "She got sick," he said quietly. "Fever took her. 2 years ago." Luisito didn't speak. He just walked to the edge of the field and stared at the smoke rising from the burning cane. That night, Don Salvatierra found him there. The old man looked smaller than Luisito remembered. Thinner, worn out, like the fire had already burned him from the inside. His face was hard, his voice shaking. "You," he said. "You did this." Luisito didn't answer. "You broke her heart," the old man went on, coughing between words. "She waited for you. Every day. And you didn't come back." Luisito opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. What could he say? That he'd been sent away by force? That he dreamed of her every night? That none of it mattered anymore? Instead, he just said, "I came back." The old man turned and walked off into the dark. From then on, people said Don Salvatierra changed. He stopped showing up at the mill. He'd sit alone near the burning fields, staring at the flames. Workers said they heard him talking to himself, or to someone else who wasn't there. Sometimes, when the smoke was thick and the moonlight weak, you could hear a woman's voice too. Soft, fragile, like sugar melting in hot coffee. "Todavía no viene?" Still, he hasn't come? They said the old man would whisper back, "He's here now." One morning, the field bosses woke to a glow on the horizon. At first, they thought it was just another controlled burn. But when they reached the edge of the property, the fire was everywhere, too wide, too hot, spreading fast. In the middle of it stood Don Salvatierra, cane torch in hand, eyes fixed on the blaze. He didn't run, didn't shout. He just watched as the smoke rose into the sky, black and thick, curling like the ghost of a promise. By the time the workers reached him, the flames had taken half the field. The man was gone. Later, they said he'd done it himself, that he'd set the fire on purpose, right where Isabella used to stand with her water bucket, laughing at the workers. Some said he wanted to see her again. Others said he wanted forgiveness. But those who've worked the cane long enough will tell you something else. When the wind is right and the fires burn low, sometimes you can hear two voices in the smoke. One deep, one soft, whispering through the stalks. They say it's them, Luisito and Isabella, and that the fire he lit wasn't destruction, it was reunion. The translator, you can make a decent living as a translator in Havana if you don't ask too many questions. That's what Miguel used to say when people asked him how he survived after losing his job at the university. Back then, he translated tourist brochures and restaurant menus. Easy money, no politics, no risks. But work dried up, and tourists started asking for more than just directions or food recommendations. They wanted help, so he started saying yes. It began with simple things. Translating for honeymooners who didn't speak a word of Spanish, or businessmen pretending to invest in art. Then one day, a man from Eastern Europe asked him to interpret during a private meeting in a hotel suite near the Malecon. Miguel told himself it was just conversation, money changing hands, documents signed. But the guards outside the door, the suitcases that never opened, and the way they avoided names told a different story. After that, he became the go-to interpreter for anything that required discretion. He didn't care who hired him, diplomats, smugglers, foreign journalists, anyone who paid in cash. His only rule was, translate exactly what you hear, nothing more, nothing less. He told himself it wasn't his business what people said. He was just the messenger. Then came her. It was a humid afternoon, the kind where shirts cling to your back, and the whole city smells like diesel and sea salt. Miguel was sitting at his usual cafe on Calle Neptuno, sipping bitter coffee, when she walked in. A woman in a wide-brimmed hat and dark sunglasses. Her Spanish was broken but careful, the kind of Spanish that came from effort, not from travel. "Are you the translator?" she asked. Miguel nodded. "I heard you take unusual work." He smiled. "Depends on how unusual." She slid an envelope across the table. Old bills, worn from heat and handling. "I just need someone to help me say something," she said, "to make sure it's true." It was a strange request, but Miguel had heard worse. He agreed. They met again that night at a small bar near Vedado. She didn't order a drink, just water. Her voice was soft, like she was afraid the words might disappear if she spoke too loud. She started talking, and he translated out loud, more out of habit than necessity. Her sentences were fragmented, full of hesitation. "Tell him, I didn't mean to, I didn't know they'd..." Miguel frowned. "Tell who?" She ignored him and went on. "He said he'd come back after the meeting." I waited, but he never... Something in the way she said it felt familiar. The rhythm. The choice of words. He'd heard it before, years ago, in another hotel room, when a nervous man with a foreign accent had begged him to deliver a message before the guards took him away. Back then, Miguel had translated it differently, cleaner, safer, less emotional. Now, hearing the woman repeat those same broken phrases, he felt a chill crawl up his neck. He stopped writing halfway through. "Where did you hear that?" The woman tilted her head. "You're the translator. Just keep going." Her next words came out in another accent, this time French. Miguel blinked. He'd once worked for a couple from Marseille who'd been detained over stolen art. The last thing the man had said before the police took him. "Please tell her I forgive her." Now she was saying it, word for word. He stared at her. "Who are you?" She smiled faintly. "You're doing fine. Just translate." The room seemed smaller now, air thicker. She switched languages again, English this time, soft and trembling. "Tell him I still have the photograph. The one by the sea." Miguel's chest tightened. That line, he'd heard it from a British journalist years ago. The one who'd been arrested for crossing the wrong people. The last message he'd been asked to translate before the man disappeared. And he'd lied. He'd told the guards something different. The woman kept speaking, her voice weaving through the smoke and noise of the bar, carrying ghosts in every syllable. One by one, they all returned. The names, the faces, the voices he'd silenced with his careful, edited translations. He wanted to stop her, but he couldn't. His mouth moved on its own, repeating her words, translating them perfectly. Not for anyone else, just for himself. By the time she stopped, the place was nearly empty. Miguel rubbed his temples, dizzy. "Who sent you?" he whispered. But the chair across from him was empty. No hat, no glass, no woman. Just a single business card, yellowed at the edges, lying where she'd been. He picked it up. It was one of his old ones, the kind he used to hand out when he first started freelancing. Miguel Alvarez, translator/interpreter. Only one thing was different. Someone had written a line under his name, in small fading ink. "You said the wrong words." He stumbled outside into the night. The air smelled like salt and smoke. Somewhere, church bells rang. He kept walking toward the sea, the card still in his hand. Behind him, he could almost hear the woman's voice. Soft, foreign, echoing in every language he'd ever spoken. "Just tell the truth," it said. For the first time in years, Miguel had nothing to translate, nothing to hide behind, just the sound of his own silence, and the ghosts finally speaking through him. Cecilia's window. Cecilia's salon sat on the corner of a narrow street in Old Havana, where the walls peeled like sunburned skin, and the air smelled of salt, hairspray, and frying oil. It wasn't much. 2 mirrors, a single old chair, and a handmade sign out front that said, "Bella Vida Beauty." But it was hers. She'd saved every peso from years of doing things she never wanted to talk about again. The kind of things people pretend not to see when they pass you on the street. The kind of life that doesn't leave bruises on the skin, but leaves them somewhere deeper. Now she was done with all that. Or so she thought. She opened the salon at 9 each morning, swept the floor, boiled water for coffee, and put on her favorite radio station. She'd chat with her neighbors, paint nails for local girls, trim old men's hair for a few pesos. During the day, the street was alive. People yelling greetings from balconies, kids kicking bottle caps, music leaking from every open window. But once the sun went down, the city changed. And that's when she saw him. The first night, she thought it was nothing. Maybe a drunk wandering home, maybe a tourist lost in the maze of alleys. But the second night, and the third, the same shadow stood in the same spot outside her window. Tall, still, watching. At first, she ignored it, pulled down the curtain, turned the radio up louder. But every time she glanced toward the glass, he was there, just beyond the reflection, half lit by the flickering street lamp. She told herself not to panic. It was Havana. People watched everything. Curiosity was a sport here, but this was different. He didn't move, didn't smoke, didn't even blink, just stared. By the end of the week, she'd stopped sleeping. Every creak of the shutters made her heart pound. She tried to laugh it off when she told her friend Rosa about it. "Maybe he's just one of your old customers," Rosa said, half joking. "They don't forget easily." Cecilia smiled weakly but said nothing. The truth was, she recognized that posture, that tilt of the head. There were a lot of faces from her past she wished she could forget, but this one, she was sure she'd seen it before. She started keeping the lights on all night, hoping it would make her feel safer. But it only made the reflection clearer. Her face in the mirror, pale and exhausted, and behind it, the faint outline of the man outside. She went to the police once. They shrugged. "If he hasn't done anything, there's nothing we can do." So she tried pretending again. The same way she used to, back when pretending was her job. Smiling for clients, laughing too loudly, never letting anyone see the fear sitting behind her eyes. But the pretending didn't work this time. Because every night, when she closed the salon and turned to lock the door, she'd see him standing there, right across the narrow street, as still as a photograph, watching. One night, she couldn't take it anymore. She was cutting a woman's hair when she noticed him again, standing under the same street lamp, his shadow stretching across the glass. Her hands trembled so badly, that she snipped a chunk too short. "Senora, are you okay?" the woman asked. Cecilia forced a laugh. "See, just tired." But she could see the man's reflection in the mirror, the way his head tilted, the way the light hit his face. It wasn't possible. It was the same man who used to visit her when she still worked the streets, the one who never gave his name, but always asked her to look in the mirror while he talked. She'd forgotten his voice, but not that stare. That night, the air felt heavy. The whole block had lost power, leaving only the dim glow from her neighbor's candle leaking through the cracks in the shutters. She sat alone in her salon, gripping the scissors tight in her hand. Through the window, she saw him again, closer this time. She couldn't take it anymore. Her hand shook as she threw the shutters open. "Basta! Enough!" she screamed. "I'm not that woman anymore. Leave me alone." Her voice echoed through the empty street. There was no one there. Just the sound of the wind, rattling a loose sign somewhere down the block. She stood frozen, her chest heaving. The street lamp flickered, and for the first time in weeks, she couldn't see his shadow. The next morning, she came to the salon early, sunlight already spilling through the glass. Everything felt still, safe. She laughed at herself for being so afraid. Then she looked into the mirror. The laughter caught in her throat. The woman staring back at her wasn't her. The face was hers, yes. Same skin, same eyes. But the makeup was different. Heavy eyeliner, red lipstick, foundation caked thick, the same way she used to wear it when she was still working the night. And she was smiling. Not the tired, polite smile she wore for customers. A slow, knowing smile. As if the reflection remembered everything she was trying to forget. She backed away, trembling. The scissors fell from her hand. The mirror fogged for a moment, just around the lips of the reflection, like it had breathed. Then, faintly, from somewhere behind the glass, came a whisper. "Te ves hermosa, Cecilia." You look beautiful. Now, every morning, her neighbors see her opening the salon, sweeping, greeting everyone with a perfect smile. They say she's changed, that she looks happier, more confident, like she's finally found herself again. But at night, when the lights go out and the mirrors catch the faint glow of the street lamp, there's always a second reflection. The same woman, same smile, waiting behind the glass. And sometimes, when a customer leaves, they swear they see someone standing just outside the window, watching. Still, silent, just waiting for her to notice. The patient. Havana looks different at night. The pastel houses fade to gray, the air grows heavy with diesel and salt, and the sound of laughter turns into whispers that slide through the alleys. That's when Dr. Ernesto Alvarez used to close his little clinic, a single room behind his house on the edge of town. He wasn't rich, the clinic wasn't fancy, but people came from everywhere. Mothers with sick children, old men with lungs full of sugar dust, women who couldn't afford hospitals. Ernesto treated them all. He took pride in it. He told himself he didn't need money, just purpose. But purpose doesn't pay for emergencies. One rainy night, Ernesto was closing up when the phone rang. It was the police. His wife and son had been in an accident. A truck had skidded off the road near the bridge. His boy was alive, but critical. They needed surgery. Fast. The public hospital said they could do it, but the supplies weren't there. They needed special instruments. Imported ones. and those didn't come cheap. Ernesto didn't have that kind of money. He sat at his desk long after midnight, the rain hitting the tin roof, trying to calculate how much he could borrow. That's when he heard a knock. It was soft at first. 3 slow taps. He opened the door, and there stood a man he hadn't seen in years. An old patient, Senor Duarte. Thin, pale, dressed too well for that hour. "Doctor," the man said with a faint smile, "you still work late?" Ernesto forced a polite nod. "What brings you here?" "I've heard you help people who have nowhere else to go." Ernesto gestured toward the empty waiting bench. "That's what I try to do." The man stepped inside, shaking the rain from his hat. "Then I'll be honest. I need help with a man who needs to be quiet permanently." Ernesto frowned. "You mean?" The man held up a hand. "No violence, no pain. Just a small vial of something to make him sleep. Forever." He placed a thick envelope on the desk. "Payment for your trouble." Ernesto stared at it, heart pounding. He wanted to throw the man out, to shout. But then he thought of his wife in the hospital bed, the machines they couldn't afford. He didn't touch the envelope. The man smiled like he could read his thoughts. "You're a good doctor, Ernesto. I know you've never taken money for the poor, but this isn't for them. This is for family." He put the envelope closer. "No one will know. Just a small vial, that's all." Then he left. Ernesto sat there for hours. He didn't open the envelope, but he didn't throw it away either. The rain stopped. The electricity flickered. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. He told himself it was just an offer. He didn't have to accept. But by morning, when the hospital called again to say they needed the payment to start the surgery, he already knew what he would do. He prepared the vial that afternoon. A painless dose. Enough to stop a heartbeat quietly, like a candle going out. He wrapped it carefully and sealed it inside a small box, just like the man had requested. When Duarte returned that evening, Ernesto didn't say a word. He just handed over the box. The man nodded, left another envelope on the table, and walked out into the fog. Ernesto sat in silence, staring at the envelope. He wanted to feel relief, but all he felt was cold. He told himself it was just chemistry, molecules doing what they were designed to do. No blood, no screams, just silence. The next morning, Ernesto woke to the sound of his radio. The old one by the clinic bed, always tuned to the local news. Officials confirmed the sudden passing of Dr. Julio Alvarez, a senior physician at the National Hospital, found unresponsive in his office early this morning. The cause of death is believed to be cardiac arrest. Ernesto froze. The cup in his hand fell and shattered. Julio Alvarez, his father. He stumbled to the table, tore open the envelope Duarte had left. Inside, stacks of bills, neatly wrapped. He didn't need to count them. He knew the number already. It was the exact amount of his father's retirement payout. He sank into the chair, chest tightening. His hands shook so hard the money slipped to the floor. His father's last words came back to him, from weeks earlier. "Son, when I retire, I'll help you expand that clinic. You're doing what I always wanted to, healing without profit." Now the money lay at his feet, soaked in sweat and guilt. For 2 days, Ernesto didn't leave the house. He didn't answer the hospital's calls. The surgery went ahead anyway. His wife and son both survived. But he couldn't bring himself to see them. He burned the box, the empty vials, everything. But the smell stayed. A faint, bitter scent that clung to the clinic walls. At night, he heard footsteps in the hall. The same slow, steady rhythm his father used when checking on him as a boy. "Papa?" he'd whisper. Nothing. Only silence. A week later, the clinic reopened. People still came. Mothers, old men, children. They called him a saint again. He didn't correct them. But those who looked closely noticed something strange. The doctor never turned on the radio anymore. And every time he passed the cabinet where the medicine was kept, he paused just for a second before moving on. No one knew why he'd stopped prescribing sleeping pills altogether. And when someone asked how his father was, he'd just smile weakly and say, "Resting." Then, when the night grew quiet and the clinic emptied, he'd sometimes sit by his desk, staring at that old radio, waiting for a voice that never came. But in the faint hum of static, he could almost hear it. "Mi hijo, you cured everyone but yourself.